Well, welcome to another episode in season 5 of Planet Possible. We're delighted you're joining us to hear evidence-led discussion about the topics that are critical to the way we manage our water and environment. And a huge thanks to our new season sponsor, Accordion, and you'll hear a little bit more about Accordion later. We're really grateful for their support in bringing Planet Possible to you. If you're new to Planet Possible, I'm Niki Roach. I'm a passionate advocate for all things water and environment, and I'm a fellow of CIWEM, the Chartered Institution of Water and Environmental Management. And CIWEM members across 90 countries are professionals with a breadth and depth of expertise in the topics that are shaping the future of our planet. And we'll be joined by many of them across this season, including today. So let's get today started. And we're going to explore the future of water today. It's a big topic and something that my guest has been thinking about alongside members of CIWEM. And when we talk about the water sector here in the UK, and we kind of primarily mean England and Wales at the moment, and we tend to mean the water that we use for drinking and the wastewater that's treated and returned to rivers. Sometimes we call that the social water cycle. And there's been a lot in our news and politics and public discussions about how that water, and specifically wastewater and storm overflows, have been and will be managed. And we've talked about it here on Planet Possible in our episode on healthy rivers. But today we're going to be thinking about what happens next. So the water companies have just submitted their plans for the next 5 years of investment, and we'll talk about that a little bit shortly. We've got the prospect of a general election being called by the end of 2024. And our political parties have just met recently for their party conferences. So there is a lot going on. And to help us make sense of it all and offer his views, I am joined again by CIWEM's Director of Policy, Alistair Chisholm. So welcome back to Planet Possible, Al.
Hi there, Nikki. Thanks again for having me.
It's always a pleasure. Okay, so let's get started. I know that you've been running a series of workshops and some thought leadership pieces around a fresh water future. Tell us a bit more about what that is and what you've been doing.
Okay, so it's really a piece of work that is looking to how we fix the kind of mess that water management is in at the moment. And I will say it's in a bit of a mess, and that's no particular slight on any specific actor in the water system. But I think having spoken to an awful lot of people, and also just bear in mind, you look around, and particularly since 2020, the coverage of some of the challenges that are existing in water management has been increasingly intense, and the glare has been increasingly bright, and there are some real challenges, and those extend across the water industry, water companies, and the activities that they're responsible for. Farming and land management, and the runoff water that comes off that land, and the water that is abstracted out of the environment to irrigate crops and to supply energy with cooling water, the water that runs off our roads and our hard surfaces in our urban areas. There's some horrible pollutants wrapped up in all of that. And we're just not getting on top of it in the way that we need to. There's this picture of really chronic, gradual decline in the health of some of our water bodies. And so there is this really growing awareness that we need to do something, but there's not a clear picture and a consensus position on exactly what we should be doing. So we've been reaching out to the public, and they're a really crucial part of all of this, because ultimately the public, we use water, we engage with it for our health and well-being. Ultimately, we've got to pay for its good management. So we've been reaching out to the public and finding out what they value and they want to see done. And then alongside that, we've been reaching out to environmental stakeholders and experts, practitioners, and so on, through a range of techniques and workshopping, and really trying to bolt down the kind of consensus positions around solutions, where we need to go, how long that might take, what we should be prioritizing. It's all quite high level, but it is quite interesting in terms of what is coming out. There's some big headlines there, so it'll be interesting to go through some of them.
Yeah, well, I mean, that'd be great to hear, really. What are some of those big headlines? What are you hearing, and who from? I guess, really, what kind of groups are saying what?
So, I mean, in terms of those groups, there's everyone from local community groups that are concerned about their local river water quality, national level NGOs, practitioners, the typical CIWEM crowd of consultants and water regulators, and people who work in local and national government, people who work in water companies, people who work in flood risk management, water resources, water quality. So the whole shebang, really. And that is I guess, the foundation of it all is we need to think about water as a system. Is the water cycle, right? Isn't it? So, and as water goes through that cycle, it touches on an enormous number of different elements, natural elements that can provide ecosystem services, filtering, cleaning, provisioning services, and then us as a social kind of entity, we get that utility out of that water, we use it, and then we have to put it back into the environment. Hopefully we use it as lightly as we possibly can, and when we put it back in a good state. That's not really happening. The fundamental headline is we need to stop thinking about things in isolation. So just wastewater treatment, sewage treatment, just flood risk management, just water resources. Look at where we can join things up, because really when you join things up, you get efficiencies, and it's going to ultimately deliver better outcomes. The more that different stakeholders can discuss the range of solutions that they want and that will make a difference to them, and also if you can combine the funding streams and the funding pots to enable delivery, you will get better efficiency in doing that if you can join it up. But obviously it's super complicated. The more people you involve in that picture and that process, the more challenging it gets. And I think that's probably why, as water practitioners, we've actually been saying these kind of things for decades now. We need to do things in a more joined up way, and somehow it doesn't quite get there. But
can I think ask you a question then?
Sorry?
Can I ask, I guess I'm thinking back to when we met John Curtin, who was the acting, who's then the chief executive of the Environment Agency. And you and I spoke to him earlier on this year, and we asked him that question, which is, do we need something that helps us think about our water in a more joined up way? Do we need a catchment system operating model? And John's view was, no, as a regulator, no, we don't. We've got everything we need in place already. We just need that to work well. So I guess my challenge back to you is, you're painting a very rosy view of the world, but is it realistic that if you join everything up, that it is more efficient, or does it just add so much inertia to the process that you never get anything done, do you think?
I think it would really depend on how you did it, and that's probably the reason why these kind of things haven't moved forward in maybe the way that they could have done, because it's really complex, and the potential for things to not work out ideally is very much there. It is going to be difficult to do this kind of approach and make it work, and there's probably going to be some failures along the way. But because of the nature of the challenges that we face, I think we've got to be prepared to fail at some of these things, learn some lessons. There are examples out there where people are doing this collaborative working really, really well now. Learning plenty of lessons from it. And it may well need to be different depending on where in the country you are, what the particular pressures are, whether you're in the southeast where you've got high population density, so you've got a lot of pressure on those drainage and sewerage networks, and you've also got a lot of pressure on your water resources. That might be quite different, but the landscape you're on, a lot of groundwater and chalk geology, which acts as a sponge and soaks water up. Compare that to up in the northwest, let's say, where you're in much more kind of steep topographical landscape. Water runs off it really quickly. You have got these big urban centres in the old, post-industrial towns and cities up there. So you get those the storm overflows challenges, but the water resources pressures are different. The industry is different there. So it's all the subtleties and complexities that mean how you target any investment that you make is going to be different. And I think what people are pointing towards is really trying to give different areas, different regions or sub-regions, maybe catchments or river basins, a little bit more license to set their own priorities, in a more concerted way than they're able to do now, and really channel the investment to the priorities that are defined by the geographical characteristics and the social characteristics there. At the moment, I think we are very centralized. There are these regional and catchment mechanisms that do add some local prioritization in there, but I think the feeling is that we need to go further down that route, and also add in some local democracy, some more local democracy into the decision-making processes there as well, because making people feel like they've got ownership of the direction of travel is going to be really important, particularly with areas of the water sector where there is low public confidence in performance at the moment. So there's a whole raft of different factors.
So let's talk about that confidence bit, because that really interests me. And I should declare an interest. I have spent lots of my career working in and around the water sector and working with water companies. So I always have a kind of, a slightly, I guess, bias, isn't it? Maybe not the word, but I have a view of the sector where I'm passionate about the sector and I see all the good people, but then I can appreciate there's an external view which is very different probably to mine. So one of the things that's front of my mind is this debate about what is the shape of the sector, and by that I mean water companies. We've got a privatised, regulated system at the moment. As part of your freshwater future, kind of all of the conversations you've been having, have you been talking to people about what the future of the water sector, if you like, those companies should look like, and if so, like what have you been hearing? What do people think we should do?
Yeah, it's a really interesting one. There's two camps in relation to this. There's one school of thought that says that pretty much ownership models and their configuration are irrelevant. What really matters is that whoever's owning them, whoever's running them, there are rules, regulations, laws out there that have been set and they need to be complied with. And irrespective of ownership models, just comply with the law and good things will come for the environment from that. There are others who feel that the ownership model absolutely defines the culture and how committed that organization is to the public and the environment, as distinct maybe from shareholder interests. And really it's incredibly difficult to get away from that commercial driver as an underpinning definer of the priority level that's going to be given to the environment. We did a survey as part of a Freshwater Future, and the audience for that was kind of either expert or informed practitioners or stakeholders. It was a weighty survey, so we weren't expecting huge numbers of responses, but nevertheless we got hundreds. And okay. Of those, only 5.5% said that they thought that the current configuration of the water industry was how they would like to see it continue. Now, that's a really starkly low number. So you then extrapolate that and you ask them what they want to see, and there's really no definitive, clear position on what people want. So it may be a kind of a not-for-profit model. It might be renationalisation. Those two were the most popular outcomes. And then, relatively close behind that was something similar to what we have now, but with a lot more corporate governance injected in to give that kind of assurance and confidence back to the public. Now, I don't think there's any kind of position that coming out of that we could say, well, here's a definitive answer. And many people as part of this process have said, well, look at Scotland. It's basically a nationalised industry. Look at Wales. It's a not-for-profit. England, it's all privatised. In Northern Ireland, you've got government-owned and contractor-operated. Everybody's got the same kind of range of problems. Everybody's looking at storm overflows as a bit of a problem, as nutrients from sewage discharges, treated sewage discharges being a problem, nutrients from agricultural land being a big problem, urban runoff being a big problem. And the performance levels, across all of these companies varies, and you can't tie one to an ownership model. So I think the ownership model is not the definer, it's the framework within which we operate. Now, having said all that, there is a clear message, and that is that practitioners and those stakeholders, because this is the where the survey went to, there is something they are not happy about in the current way of operating, and they want more assurance around the social purpose, the public interest, and the environmental performance. Now, that may come from stronger regulation. It may come from changes to how people are involved in corporate governance and decision making. There may be mechanisms which may be auditable that point towards public purpose, and it might be a combination of all of those things. But really, the headline is it's not healthy at the moment, and it needs to improve. And that then sets the tone for what we might do next. So, yeah, it's a sobering time. I don't think it's surprising. As I said, since 2020, all of this has been coming out in the media. Campaigners have been really shining a bright light on it, and we know there's an issue. The question is, will what is in water company business plans for the next 5 years make any dent in that? Is there other things that need to be rolled out to provide that extra assurance? And what can we do outside of the water industry space to really make an impact? Because the water industry is only part of the problem.
Yeah, I mean, we don't operate as a sector in a vacuum, do we? But I think it's really, really interesting, your point around, I mean, obviously I like thinking about connecting things up. It was my presidential theme a few years back for the CIWEM, and I think it's easy to say and hard to do, but we've got to do that better, haven't we? Otherwise, we're going to just end up with more of the same. So you just touched there on business plans, and for those people, many of whom don't work in the water sector, I'm sure, certainly not in this bit of it, you may or may not be aware. So the water sector have just put in their 5-year business plans. There is in total £96 billion with investments. That's across the water companies in England and Wales that's been put on the table. There's a process to go through that goes to Ofwat, the regulator, and eventually what shakes out of that is a final number, which is how much the water companies can then go and invest. The current 5-year period, for context, is 52 billion. So we're seeing a sector saying they're almost doubling the amount of investment going into water and wastewater infrastructure across England and Wales over the next 5 years. What are your reflections on what you've seen coming out of what water companies are saying they want to do as part of that 5-year plan?
I mean, I haven't looked in depth at all of the different company plans, and
not read them all yet.
No. Look at the headlines. It's a massive increase on the level of investment that was there before. People have been saying that the water industry needs to invest more. Well, here it is. There's a lot of people who are saying, well, hang on, customers, ultimately water bill payers, are going to have to pay for this. It's not really the water companies making the investment. They're making it on behalf of us as water bill payers. And, to a great extent, that's how it works. But there is some outrage at, some of the events that have gone on before, and a feeling that bill payers have already paid some of this money, and it hasn't been invested as it might have been. And I think that's a real challenge for the sector. I think it will also put pressure on politicians or on the government to put pressure on Ofwat to push things down a little bit. The bill impact of that investment for customers will start off at the beginning of in 2025 at £7 a month, which is what, bad maths. It was never my strong point, but 80-something pound a year, rising to about £13 a month, I think, by the end 2030. So that's £148, is it, or something like that? Maybe a bit more.
Let's not even talk about my maths.
Bad maths.
Yeah.
Anyway, it's not insignificant, obviously we are in a cost of living say crisis, but it's
Yeah.
challenging times for people in terms of their household bills. And this is not an insignificant increase on top of everything else that they're going to have to bear for that. Now, something has to happen, I think, as a kind of a quid pro quo to effectively give something back to people to assure them that that money is going to be spent well, is going to be spent in their interest, is going to be spent efficiently. And that's the challenge for the regulators, I think, now, is to make sure that those schemes really are delivering value for money for customers, that they're delivering the maximum possible progress that they can. And we've spoken a lot before about the desire to see things delivered in the right way. I think it's very hard to get away from the fact that this probably will be a very concrete heavy investment period. There's going to be a lot of upgrades to sewage treatment works. There's going to be new reservoirs in there, a lot of heavy infrastructure. And one of the observations, just going back to a freshwater future, is that one of the things that was really, I guess, neglected in the whole suite of infrastructure spend over the years is capital maintenance in keeping the existing infrastructure, up to spec and up to appropriate performance levels. And I think there will be an awful lot of new capital investment in works upgrades, in storm overflows upgrades, and it's a lot of new kit. There's going to be a lot of concrete and emissions associated with that, and we're probably not going to see too much in the way of nature-based solutions and that kind of thing, which certainly a lot of the environmental groups really wanted to see unleashed through this planning process and this program.
I mean, on a personal note, I think that's really interesting, because when we talk to, again, thinking back to our conversation with John Curtin, one of John's kind of parting comments was, I really hope that this doesn't become, before the business plans went in, an investment period where we end up pouring lots of concrete. I think what I certainly see is the challenges that customers rightly expect certainty in outcomes. They want to see those storm overflow discharges reducing. The regulator, understandably, wants to see certainty in outcome. And the challenge is, I think, at the moment, that our nature-based solutions, so, using the environment to help us do some of these things, there is inherently a bit less certainty and slightly longer lead times. And I don't know how the water sector, the regulators and customers square that circle, because we need nuance. We need to accept that there's grey, and probably we need quite a lot of trust if we want to do those kind of solutions more. And I feel like that's the one thing that just, again, quite understandably, has kind of vanished. So we are going to end up, the unintended consequence of like this really rapid progress and and quite understandable desire for improvement is lots more concrete being poured, lots more emissions, and like loads of missed opportunities. That's the thing. I'm not speaking as a host here. I'm speaking as, from a personal perspective. It's a bit heartbreaking, because there will be so many opportunities to do things in a tread more lightly kind of way over the next 5 years that we're going to miss because of this haste. And yes, I guess, that's not a question. That's more of an observation, really. But it's I think it's a shame, and I think it's a fact. It's a factor of a lack of trust, meaning that we have to go for hard and fast absolutes, and and that's the consequence, I think, of some of that. Yeah,
I think absolutely. It is that old adage that if you were going to start from somewhere, it wouldn't be here, and there's a lot of making up for the fact that performance and behaviours have not been as they should have been everywhere in over the past decade or so, and that is having an impact on the measures that are coming through, and I don't see unfortunately much alternative to that, because there needs to be a real uplift in a demonstrable outcome that the public can see happening after the next 5-year program, to say, okay, these guys are making progress, and maybe now we'll let them be a bit more innovative, be a bit more experimental in terms of how they're delivering some of the outcomes, and give them a little bit more wriggle room in terms of the rigidity of that. But I don't think it's very possible to do that in the current climate. It's really hard.
Well, we're called Planet Possible, so I'm going to hold on to a glimmer of optimism and positivity that maybe, I think maybe this is where the sector and all of its partners and environmental NGOs have to show a bit of leadership and say, we know it's difficult, but what can we do to give more certainty and to do the hard stuff, really, so that we can still deliver for customers, but we can also deliver for the environment. I'm going to hold on to that, Al. I'm going to drag you with me, kicking and screaming. Okay, Al. So, I guess one of the things that we heard from those freshwater future sessions that you talked about at the beginning was that there's a general sense that something needs to change. Mm-hmm. One of the things that could change is that a water company fails. I guess maybe they're too big to fail. I wonder, and I'm interested in if a seismic event like that happens. We've just seen really big business plans going in. Maybe regulators won't give water companies the money that they need. If a water company fails, what do you think about that? Is that helpful given the kind of current debate that we find ourselves in about what the future needs to look like?
I don't think it's helpful in the kind of proactive, helpful sense of the term.
Sure, and I'm not suggesting,
I don't think it's the end of the world at all. Okay. There are measures set out in legislation which prescribe an approach in which basically Ofwat would step in and government would be there to ensure that people's taps keep flowing. And they would take on the asset base of the organisation, the company that failed, and over a period of time they would either find new investors if it was to stay as a private company, or it could in theory switch to a different model. It might be municipalised or turned into a not-for-profit. That was actually what happened with Welsh Water. It was a kind of a standard private company, I guess, before it changed to a not-for-profit. And so I think any outcome should be on the table. I don't think any companies fail, full stop. Private companies fail, and they fail because they either don't perform well enough or they don't respond to market conditions. Now, I get, water companies don't operate in a conventional market, they're monopolies. But I guess the parallel there would be that they would not be responding to a change in public or electorate defined norms of environmental behaviour, performance standards. And if companies don't respond to those kind of pressures, then they do go under, and that should be allowed to happen. I don't think there should be any kind of get out of jail free cards for any water companies. There are alternatives, and as we've said that there are 4 different ownership models in the UK, and they, to a greater or lesser extent, they all perform well or not so well. They all provide really good quality drinking water to their customers, and they do provide sewerage services, but they've all got challenges. So there are loads of ways you can kind of square this circle. We shouldn't be obsessively prescriptive in terms of what model should endure in this country, and it needs to respond to those pressures, I think.
I think I'd really like to think about, I guess, the wider environment, and something that I know you're really close to is what our political parties have been saying about all of this. So we've just had the party conference season. The sector does not exist in a vacuum. And as we said at the start, by the end of 2024, we will have called a general election. Are you seeing, well, what are you seeing actually from the political parties? Is environment coming out very loudly for them? And if it is, what kind of things are they saying about the future of water?
Oh yeah, I think environment as an issue will dominate this election one way or another more than it's dominated any election previously, because society is so aware now of both climate pressures but also nature decline, and certainly within these shores, the water quality and the freshwater health challenge. And so those are very big political issues, and they will be election issues. And so they are featuring quite significantly on political parties' agendas. And I'm sure they will do in manifestos when it comes to manifesto time. But in terms of the kind of pledges that have been put forward in the party conferences recently, I mean, taking them one at a time, the Liberal Democrats is probably the most fully formed. They've put out policy papers, one on tackling the nature crisis, one a little bit more explicitly on fairness for customers and that kind of thing. And these are meaty documents, 70-odd page documents, setting out their policy positions. So on water and on the kind of issue, so agriculture, water industry is dominating this, and the so-called sewage crisis, sewage scandal, is very much political kind of capital for opposition parties in particular. But the Liberal Democrats have said that they're going to support nature-friendly farming, which is great, and obviously would have tangible beneficial outcomes for water in the context of farming and kind of land management. So they've pledged to put an extra $1 billion a year on top of the roughly $3 billion that is being driven through the environmental land management schemes. And they say they can't go higher than that at the moment, but they'll look at it should they get into power. They've pledged to introduce a new office for environmental integrity. So, industry and corporate organisations are getting behind this environmental awareness, and I think they want to make sure that there's some guarantee that is legitimate where companies are making those kind of claims. Big focus on sewage and ending sewage pollution. And their thesis is that the government's plans on this are too slow. Over the years, it's very much been focused on keeping bills low rather than funding regulators properly and investing in delivery. And so they want to see faster progress against the storm overflows reduction plan. They say they're going to introduce a sewage tax on water company profits. So I guess that's some kind of windfall tax to help to pay for regulators and cleanup. They've got Ofwat in their crosshairs very much, and they say they're going to abolish it and replace it with a new regulator with strengthened powers to hold water companies to account. There's a lot of talk about monitoring across the parties, but Lib Dems are saying they want real-time data on storm overflow spill duration, volume and quality. So there's a very heavy focus on spills there. And the other big kind of dimension to all of that is that they want to make water companies into kind of US style public interest companies. So they would still be for profit, but that US style almost kind of Patagonia like structure. Where public interest is very much kind of rooted into the ethos, and you've got local representation on the boards and all that kind of thing. They're also setting out measures on chemicals, very much behind the kind of precautionary principle, looking at implementing catchment nutrient budgets and nutrient management plans, strong action on abstraction, and also they're talking about setting up blue corridors around rivers, so to signify areas of particular value for recreational and wildlife value, and having blue flag rivers, so basically bathing waters for rivers. Labour are being...
Sorry to interrupt, that's a lot, isn't it, actually?
Yeah. So, I mean, as I say,
even if
they
don't get into power, there's a lot there's rich pickings there to pull through as policy ideas. Interesting. Yeah. Sorry, you were going to talk about Labour. So what do we hear?
Yeah, Labour are just going all out attack really on the water industry. Okay. It seems they've not got that much that they've said in terms of water management in a farming context or in the urban context. It's really zeroing in on the kind of public outrage around water company performance. Very much blaming the Conservatives for what they term the sewage scandal, and saying that they've been negligent in how they've
taken out all kind of
dealt with that. They say they're going to put water companies under special measures, whatever those would be, but basically that they would force companies to monitor every what they call water outlet, so discharge point, and so that's over and above storm overflows. I guess it would be sort of final effluent monitoring and that kind of thing. And then the other thing is that in tandem with that, they'd be introducing what they call severe and instant fines for any illegal, so I guess non-permitted,
consented discharges. Right.
Discharge, and that should create a kind of a level of regulatory fear that water companies won't be tempted to transgress beyond any more. And then the target is then executive pay and bonuses and restrictions on. Basically, they say they're going to give Ofwat powers to ban bonuses for executives until sewage pollution is cleaned up. However you define that, and also that there would be personal criminal liability for persistent extreme contraventions of the law by water companies. So very, very much taking target at water companies. And then really from the Conservative point of view, they've not said too much, to be honest, apart from saying that it was them who introduced event duration monitors on storm overflows, that they've introduced their plan for water, pointing to the fact that the High Court recently dismissed a challenge on effectively the legality of the storm overflows discharge reduction plan, and saying that the other parties' plans would basically cause thousands of pounds of bill increases for customers. So I mean, they're all plays on what is either in existence already or is being put in train, actually. And on the fines front, there is the civil sanctions penalty cap that's being removed. It was capped. These fines were, or they are penalties, not fines. Fines are what comes through courts, but the penalties that environmental regulators can impose on polluters, there was a cap of £250,000 for that, and that cap is going, and there won't be one at all. So in theory, very severe fines could come. Water company bosses can, in theory, be taken to court as part of criminal prosecutions of water companies. So their company directors. Ofwat does have powers to address bonuses and dividends, and that is actually linked to environmental performance as well as things like financial sustainability. But these are new powers for Ofwat. They haven't really had the chance to flex those muscles, and I think with all of these, there's some headline grabbing things that can be said about new legislation, new fines, new powers. We've got a lot of legislation in place, and there are powers in place. And I think one of the points that campaigners will have made is that those haven't been used. There's been political pressure to maybe not enforce them as much, or political decision making in the background that has reduced the ability to actually enforce those powers and laws. And that will have to be the question in future. It doesn't, in many ways, it doesn't matter what you introduce, it's whether you're using them that counts in terms of the outcomes for the environment. But at the moment, we're very much in the era of pledges and presentational stuff, trying to get the audience. It will be interesting to see the direction these get refined in as we move into full manifestos.
Just hearing what you were reflecting on there, it was interesting for me that what we opened with, what we were hearing from those people that you've spoken to, stakeholders, customers, people that work in the sector, that message seemed to be where we are at the moment isn't working, and we need something to be much more connected. And then what you've reflected back to me there from what the parties are saying is, stronger regulation, more enforcement of existing powers, maybe more monitoring. But it feels like there's a bit of a disconnect, or at least it sounds like it, in that I'm not hearing any of those parties saying fundamentally we need to change the shape or change the levels of connectivity, I guess. Really, it's interesting that the things that those people working in the sector are saying probably the things that are a bit broken aren't necessarily the things that our political parties are saying they're going to fix. Is that a fair summary, though, or have I misinterpreted a bit?
No, I think it's definitely a fair summary. Unfortunately, the things that need to be fixed are not always headline grabbing.
Yes.
And as a, we find that as an organisation that does sometimes zero in on the kind of technical components of delivery and engagement, and how different responsible agencies work together, and whether they can or not, whether they're empowered to, whether they've got the right duties, whether they've got the capacity. None of those are really going to create blazing headlines and massive manifesto hooks, unfortunately. So I think what we need to look at is the spirit of what is being said here, and understand what's underneath it. And I think we do understand what's underneath it, and actually map out the kind of practical delivery mechanisms that could help deliver some of these ambitions. I do agree. I think there is a need for a stronger regulatory baseline and a clear message that the environment cannot protect itself and it needs strong regulators. If those are not there, then there is always the opportunity for organizations or individuals who are motivated to not conserve the environment to do it and to get away with it. And I mentioned a chronic decline over the years, and in many ways that has been because we haven't had strict enough, comprehensive enough, granular enough regulation and enforcement. It's not been invested in enough. And so within the kind of business structures that we have, we're a very capitalist country. There's not the checks and balances, and there's not the drivers to be environmentally responsible that balance out the very strong drivers to be profitable and to deliver for shareholders. And that goes beyond water companies. That's across the piece. There's a wide range of polluters in the water world, and you can look at everything from product manufacturers for transport through to chemicals companies in who make products in our day-to-day lives in our households, and then there's water companies, and the environment cannot protect itself. It needs a protector, and that is a very strong message that I think is coming out from all sides.
It's really clear, and I'm nodding in agreement. I always ask guests, and you're a regular, but you know what's coming. I always ask guests, and if I gave you the Planet Possible magic wand, what would you like to make possible? We've covered a lot today, so I'm going to pass it to you, not in your capacity as Director of Policy at CIWEM, but Al Chisholm, man on the street. Here's the Planet Possible magic wand. If you could make one of the things that we've talked about or that's in your mind possible, what would you like to see happen?
I'd like to make the nerdy delivery focused stuff actually get political traction. I think look, we just need to start doing things properly and take the environment seriously. It's the only environment we've got. This is the only planet we've got. These are the only shores we've got in the UK. We need to look after them. We need to treat them like they matter. They are the foundation of our economy and our healthy society. And there's so much capital there that we have used and abused over the years, and we need to start giving something back now. And that does not mean throwing gazillions of pounds of money at green schemes in the environment. We need to start counting the benefits and working the benefits into decision-making processes. And actually, if we do that and we count those benefits, we'll work out that the net cost is not all that great. It's about being very caring in terms of our decision-making processes and recognizing that in terms of the investments and the governance structures that we set out. and that is pretty boring. But the outcomes are not, you know.
Yeah.
It's very systematic. It's very methodical. It's detailed. Just get your head down and work constructively with each other. Stuff is not going to make headlines in the way that millions of hours of storm overflows and massive fines are going to, or banging water company chief execs up in jail. But it's what will ultimately deliver the good outcomes for society.
It's a very grown-up answer, and
that's the first time I've ever been called a grown-up, Niki.
Well, I was thinking it, but it's true, isn't it? Sometimes the boring stuff is the stuff that's really important. As ever, time's flown by, and we are here at another end of another episode of Planet Possible. But a huge thank you to you for joining us. I hope you found the conversation that Al and I have had insightful. I hope it's given you something to think about in your world. You can subscribe to Planet Possible on your usual podcast player to never miss an episode. We would love to hear your ratings and reviews too. And now you can even find us on TikTok. At some point, I'm going to work out what TikTok is, but we're definitely on it. I am really looking forward to sharing the rest of the season with you all. You'll see a new episode landing once a month. And as ever, there'll be some specials in there too. But all that leaves me to say for now is a huge thank you to my guest today, Al Chisholm. So a huge thanks for joining us, Al.
Thank you, Niki.
And that's it for now, everyone. Stay safe, and we'll see you next time.